former president off the hook for his flagrantly anti-democratic behavior. Trump is accused of attempting to overturn the 2020 election, essentially anointing himself by invalidating the choices of millions of voters. The court's ruling complicates the case against him considerably. It a direct threat to our democracy itself. So the Supreme Court found something in our Constitution that no one else has been able to find over almost 250 years. Of course, our Constitution came 11 years after our Declaration of Independence. So let's say 240 years. 240 years, presidents accountable to the law, be prosecuted for crimes, and then suddenly in 2024, the Supreme Court said, we want to give immunity. We think it's good policy to give the president immunity. They said things like they didn't want the president to have to worry about whether they're breaking the law, so we'll just decide the president's immune to the law. You know, the Supreme Court's not supposed to make law. They're supposed to enforce the Constitution. But they designated themselves based on their judgment that it'd be a good thing for the president to be immune from potential prosecution, to just give him that power. They could have said, in their opinion, we think it might be good practice. So even though the Constitution doesn't say it, we encourage Congress to take a look at this possible policy improvement. And I think we would have sat here, Democrats and Republicans together, and said, who are you kidding? We've read the Constitution. We've taken an oath to the Constitution. There is no clause in Article 2 of the Constitution that says the president's immune from prosecution or that the president is above the law. And if you combine that power of the president to commit a crime with the power to also give pardons for anyone in the executive branch who is executing decisions of the president, you now have an entire executive branch that feels empowered to operate outside the law. Well, that's about where we are now. Combine immunity with the president's pardon power, and the entire executive branch believes it can operate outside of the law. And operating outside the law is exactly what we've seen. On January 20th, I sat in the rotunda of the Capitol, just down the hall from these double doors to my right, situated halfway between the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, for Donald Trump's inaugural address. It was not a traditional address in which a president lays out a vision. A traditional address, the president says, here is the vision I laid out for the country when I was campaigning, and now I'm going to work with Congress to implement this vision. And the reason the president says that is because the Constitution places the power to decide the direction of the country with Congress. What programs to fund and at what level to fund them. Power is placed with Congress. So to execute the vision from the campaign, presidents say, and I'm going to work with Congress. I'm going to work with both sides in Congress to build that future that I promised in my campaign. Instead, in his speech, Trump talked about ruling by executive order, governing by executive order, governing by fiat. Nothing about working with Congress to achieve the vision. He issued 26 executive orders on his first day. He's issued more than 200 from that inauguration in January till now. Many of these orders have directly violated our country's legal statutes. It is a vision of government where power flows not from the law, but from President Trump. He fired 17 inspectors general, violating the law that allows the president to fire an inspector general only for cause and with 30 days notice to Congress. Let me read you an article when these firings happened in January. The title is "Fired Inspectors General Raise Alarms as Trump's Administration Moves to Finalize the Purge," written by Charlie Savage on January 27th of this year. The Trump administration on Monday ordered former staff members for as many as 17 fired inspector general to immediately arrange for the return of work laptops, phones, parking decals, and ID cards, even as questions remained over whether President Trump broke the law in dismissing these independent watchdogs. Some of the fired officials were seeking to raise alarms about what had happened. Among them was Mark Greenblatt, whom Trump had appointed as Inspector General of the Interior Department 5 years ago, and who had led an interagency council of the watchdog officials until the new year. This raises an existential threat with respect to the primary independent oversight function in the federal government, Mr. Greenblatt said. We have preserved the independence of inspectors general by making them not swing with every change of a political party. He warned the credibility of the inspectors would be at issue if Mr. Trump put in lackeys who are rubber stamping his programs and exonerating allegations for his own people willy-nilly. Doing so would give the next Democratic president an incentive to fire them all too, setting off a never-ending cycle of politicization. Aboard Air Force One on Saturday, the article continues, Mr. Trump defended the purge. Some people, he said, quote, some people thought that some were unfair or some were not doing the job, he said, falsely claiming that a mass removal of inspectors general was a very standard thing to do. That is not true. While it is the case that after Congress enacted the Inspector General Act in 1978, and President Ronald Reagan removed all those he inherited from President Jimmy Carter in 1981, he later rehired some of them, and since then the norm has been they remain in place when new presidents take office, underscoring their role as nonpartisan officials. Even as word began to seep out late Friday into the weekend that the White House had tersely dismissed officials, citing its, quote, changing priorities, it had not released a comprehensive list of who had been fired, leading to confusion about the extent of the purge. In an interview on Monday, Hannibal Ware, who goes by Mike, and who took over as chair of the Interagency Council in January and was among those fired, said the dismissals he knew of extended to 17 officials covering 18 agencies. He had held the watchdog role for 2 agencies, one of which was in an acting capacity. The agencies were, he said, the departments of Ag, Commerce, Defense, Education, Energy, Health and Human Services, Housing, Urban Development, Interior, Labor, State, Transportation, Treasury, and Veterans Affairs. They also included, he said, an Inspector General for the Afghanistan Reconstruction and the internal watchdogs at the Environmental Protection Agency, the White House's Office of Personnel Management, and Mr. Ware's own 2 agencies, Small Business Administration and Social Security Administration. But underscoring the confusion, at least one of those inspectors, Krista Boyd of the Office of Personnel Management, found herself locked out of a system even though she had not received an email informing her that she'd been fired, according to people familiar with the matter. The Inspector General community is assuming that she also was terminated. In response to this purge, Mr. Ware, in a letter to the White House late Friday, suggested the firings were illegal because they violated a law that requires giving Congress 30 days advance notice with the reason for any removal of an Inspector General. Congress passed the Inspector General Act as part of the wave of post-Watergate reforms to government. The idea was to have officials embedded in major parts of the executive branch who did not report to that department or agency's head, and so they're able to perform independent internal oversight. In 2020, Mr. Trump summarily ousted or sidelined a series of inspectors general who are seen as investigating his administration aggressively. Partly in response to that, Congress strengthened the 30-day notice law by requiring presidents to provide a substantive rationale, including a detailed, case-specific reason for a firing. In an interview, Mr. Ware warned the administration could flout part of the Inspector General Act, then it would establish that it need not abide by the rest of the law, including provisions requiring giving watchdogs unfettered access to agency files. Quote, what strength is there in the Inspector General Act if they say they don't have to abide by parts of it, he asked. This is a threat to our democracy. Mr. Missel, who was removed as the IG for the Department of Veteran Affairs, pointed to Congress as a potential defense of the institution. He said, for Inspector General to continue to improve government services and ensure taxpayer funds are spent effectively, they must continue to be truly independent and have the support of Congress. In a letter over the weekend, the ranking Democrats on the House Oversight Committee said the following: this attempt to unlawfully and arbitrarily remove more than a dozen independent, nonpartisan inspectors general without notice to Congress and in the dead of night is a blatant violation of law. It should disturb all of us that one of the first acts of this administration on this path to authoritarian control of our nation was to throw out those independent watchdogs. That, in fact, is a common symptom of an authoritarian takeover. Get rid of the inspectors. In this case, Congress, all of us, has strengthened the law to make their require not just notice, but a specific act, an egregious act to be fired. So that they really too could feel independent, not accountable to the head, and could report things honestly. I know in my work here over the last 17 years, I have repeatedly read Inspector General's reports, and they have often been some of the most insightful examinations of what is going right and what is going wrong, and given us as legislators ideas for things that need to be fixed. But you can't have that type of valuable input if the Inspector Generals are not independent. If they're worried that the first critical thing they say or point out, they will be fired. Now, it was also reported the Trump administration blocked funding for the Council of Inspectors General on integrity and efficiency. Block the funding for those who are dedicated to integrity and efficiency. Now let me share with you some reporting from just a week ago. And it's titled, Trump Administration Defunds the Federal Watchdog Office. The White House last week informed a federal office charged with conducting oversight of the Trump administration that it was blocking congressionally approved money for its operations for the coming fiscal year, effectively shuttering it after midnight on Tuesday. The blocked funds are not linked to the funding showdown between congressional Democrats and Republicans that could prompt a government shutdown. The decision to defund the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, which drew quick condemnation from top Republicans in the Senate who are now pressing to reverse it, was the latest effort by the White House to undermine independent investigators in the federal government. It was also an end run around Congress by a White House that has repeatedly sought to usurp legislative branch's power over federal spending. The move would shut down an umbrella office that supports the government's 72 inspectors general, could wipe out a public website where they post their reports, which includes a repository of decades of recommendations on how the government could save money. In a letter on Monday, Senators Collins, Republican of Maine, and Chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, and Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, Chair of the Judiciary, called on the White House to release the funding. Absent immediate action, they wrote, the watchdog office will furlough staff and terminate important functions that help prevent and detect waste, fraud, and abuse throughout the government. So I appreciate that my two colleagues weighed in that fashion, because this entire operation attacking the inspector generals is the exact opposite of what Trump said he wanted to achieve through DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. The inspector generals report when things are going wrong, and they report when things are going right. They provide suggestions on how things can be fixed. So if you really want to have a Department on Government Efficiency, one of the first things you would do is strengthen the inspector generals, not undermine them. If, on the other hand, you want to run the government in an authoritarian fashion, you don't want people keeping an eye on what you're doing and reporting it to Congress or reporting it to the American people. So you fire the inspectors. In addition to the firings of the inspector generals, Trump and Vogt, V-O-U-G-H-T, our current head of OMB, and Elon Musk fired federal workers who provide critical services. Politico did a report on how the cuts to the Forest Service increase wildfire risk. And the article is titled, "Crazy, Forest Service Cuts Ignite Fear and Fury Over Wildfire Risks." Now, I come from the west part of the country. The West is besieged every year by wildfires. We used to think of them as the summer wildfires, but now in Oregon, they can be in the spring or the summer or the fall. And further south in California, they can be any month of the year. The wildfire seasons are getting longer because with climate change, our forests are drier. We also have more lightning strikes, often more wind, that fuels the fires from an initial small fire into a large conflagration. So whenever the infrastructure for fighting fires or treating the forest to reduce the risk of fire in the first place is assaulted, we get a little worried out west. But here is what the Politico article said. Officials from Nevada to New Jersey to Utah and beyond are scrambling to take stock of President Donald Trump's cuts to the U.S. Forest Service, deciding how to respond as the summer wildfire season looms. Forest fires aren't going to take 4 years off just because of who's in the White House, said Colorado Governor Polis in an interview following the announcement of a $7 million cut in state wildfire mitigation grants. So it's really important that states up the bar on preparation. Trump has cut 10% of the workers at the Forest Service, an agency that manages 193 million acres of national forests and grasslands, with more firings and a steep reorganization likely coming. About 75% of the agency staff are trained in wildland firefighting. That means there are fewer workers across the country clearing brush, thinning trees, we call this forest management, to reduce the risk and intensity of wildfires. And when fires do break out, there will be fewer workers to stop the spread of the fire. The cuts have prompted alarm bells in state capitals as attention on wildfires and forestry policy has arguably never been higher in the wake of devastating fires that ripped through Los Angeles earlier this year. Record drought, heat waves, sluggish prevention work have exacerbated fires in recent decades. An average of 3 million acres burned nationwide each year in the 1990s, but now the average is nearly 7 million acres per year, according to the National Interagency Fire Center. Now, with that critical prevention work at risk of slowing, states and cities are weighing drastic actions to safeguard against the threat of potentially more fire-prone national lands, since fire doesn't respect federal, state, or private land boundaries. Nevada State Forester and Fire Warden Casey told Politico, "We're going to be headed into what could be a big fire season in the state of Nevada," adding that she can exercise emergency hiring authority if needed. The federal government owns 86% of Nevada's land. "I'm nervous about our ability to maintain those public lands with the people who work on the ground doing the important critical work that actually helps lessen the risk of catastrophic loss from fire. The shrinking of the Forest Service is hitting the agency both on the ground and at the leadership level, with Biden-era Chief Randy Moore retiring in the wake of mass layoffs and more half the regional heads also departing." The article goes on at some length. I'm going to spare you from the rest of it because the point is quite clear. Massive cuts to the Forest Service were creating enormous danger of increased fires in the West. These firings were often in complete violation of the law. There is a law called the RIF law, the Reduction in Force law, and it lays out a very, very careful analysis that has to go on to make sure that when you do reduce the size of an agency, that you do it in a manner that produces the best possible results. And if you do the firings without that process, that is illegal. So fire inspector generals, without notice, broke the law. Firing them without cause broke the law. Firing forest workers without a proper RIF analysis broke the law. Trump also proceeded to fire the board members of independent agencies, violating laws that establish the terms of office and violating the laws that allow them to be fired only for cause. He violated the Anti-Deficiency Act when Elon Musk and Doge sent the fork in the road email to 2 million federal employees, offering a buyout with pay through September 30th. He violated the Privacy Act when Trump, Musk, and the Doge accessed sensitive personal information from computers of the Social Security Administration. He violated a 2018 law banning reductions in indirect costs covered by NIH research grants when he capped those rates at 15%. Trump issued an executive order ending birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship, which is in our Constitution. It was quickly blocked by a federal judge. Trump is routinely bypassing the Senate's confirmation process by making interim appointments of U.S. attorneys around the country in clear violation of the intent and requirements of the law. Now, in this government shutdown, he's breaking several laws by using nonpartisan government agencies to amplify his political messaging. I'll read to you a letter that senators sent, including myself, to the administration, to Russ Vought, the director of the Office of Management and Budget. My point in all of these pieces, all of these different actions, from the inspector generals being fired to board members being tossed, all in violation of the laws concerning the executive branch, is that we have an authoritarian president who acts and believes that he is beyond the law, not accountable to the law, and as a strong man can do whatever the hell he wants. It's our responsibility to say, hell no. We have a Constitution. We took an oath to that Constitution. It's our responsibility to pass legislation that patches in any gray areas, to make things clear. If the courts say it's not quite clear, we need to make it clear, but we're not doing that. So this letter, in regard to the use of nonpartisan government agencies for political messaging, is an important accounting of trying to hold the administration to the rule of law. Director vote. As Congress continues to work on funding the federal government for fiscal year 2026, the White House and political appointees assigned to agencies within the executive branch have been engaged in widespread campaign of partisan political activities. These activities are in blatant violation of Section 715 of Public Law 11847, which prohibits federal funds from being used for propaganda purposes designed to support or defeat legislation pending before Congress. These activities appear to violate the Anti-Lobbying Act and the Hatch Act. We urge you to immediately remove these illegal, partisan messages to comply with the law and hold accountable those who have directed this behavior. As early as September 30th, 2025, federal agencies began publicly posting various notices and other media from official accounts on official websites in official email correspondence that violate 715's prohibition on propaganda. For example, the official website of the Department of Housing and Urban Development displayed a blatantly partisan political banner on their website claiming that, quote, the radical left are going to inflict massive pain on the American people. This is partisan political messaging done on government websites. Violation of the Anti-Lobbying Act, violation of the Hatch Act, violation of 715 of Public Law 11847. On October 1st, similar partisan political messages appear on the websites for the Small Business Administration, the Department of Justice, the Department of Ag, among others. In addition to website updates, federal employees, including the Small Business Administration, Department of Labor, Department of Education, Department of Veterans Affairs, were reportedly directed to set automatic reply email messages with partisan political propaganda, which asserts that, quote, Democratic senators are blocking passage of H.R. 5371 in the Senate, which has led to a lapse in appropriations, end of quote. As you well know, these messages are misleading, given the Democrats have voted 4 times over the past week to fully fund the government, only to be rebuffed by our Republican colleagues. But more important, they are clear violations of Section 715, which prohibits the use of federal funds by an agency to publicly support or oppose legislation before the Congress. Spirited public debate has its place, but agency resources, including websites or emails, should not be used to send overtly political, and in this case, misleading messages to the American people. Congress has long enacted laws to ensure partisan political activities and propaganda do not impede the government's ability to serve all Americans. Given the blatant, systematic, and repeated violations of Section 715 of Public Law 11847 and likely violations of the Anti-Lobbying and Hatch Acts over the last week, you must immediately remove these partisan messages from all executive branch agency communications and websites. I never thought I'd see the day that a president of the United States would use the instruments of the government to run a blatant political campaign, saying we're blaming this party or that group for this outcome. That so undermines the vision of an executive branch elected to serve all the people of the United States. So undermines the vision that we do not politicize the functions of the executive branch. The way that they operate, the programs they support, the levels at which they're funded, all of those things will, of course, change according to laws that we pass here. But political messages, blatant political attacks, campaign slogans on official websites is against the law, and another law that the president is breaking. In March, The Atlantic published a piece titled, "America is Watching the Rise of the Dual State." And it describes how another authoritarian regime, quote, maintained a day-to-day normalcy for many of its citizens while at the same time establishing a domain of lawlessness. It's a sizable article.
You broke my monitor, give me it. You broke my
So for now, I'm not going to read all of it to you, but I will read